Picture the scene. You are mail-brigged, a formidable warlord commanding the rugged lands of northern Scotland in the year 890. You stand on the cusp of a peace treaty with the formidable Orkney Vikings. The agreed-upon terms are solemn and sacred, a parley involving 40 men mounted on 40 horses from each side, intended to finally resolve a long-standing border dispute. No grand armies, no hidden stratagems, just a direct, honorable meeting. As you scan the distant horizon, the silhouette of the Viking leader, Sigurd the Mighty, emerges. Your eyes meticulously count the approaching horses. 1, 2, 40. Precisely 40. Reassured, you gesture for your warriors to lower their weapons, ready for the diplomatic encounter. But as the riders thunder closer, the earth trembles with an unnatural intensity. You narrow your eyes, a chilling realization dawning as you glimpse the saddles. Your blood turns to ice. From every single horse, 2 pairs of legs swing freely. Sigurd, with audacious deceit, has strapped a second, hidden warrior behind each unsuspecting rider. This is no peace delegation of 40 men coming to parley. This is a lethal cavalry unit of 80 heavily armed warriors, surging forward with the intent to slaughter. Your cry of betrayal rips through the air, but it's already too late. The devastating charge has already been unleashed. Within mere minutes, your 40 honor guards are brutally cut down, their lives extinguished in a whirlwind of steel. You are violently forced to your knees, and it is Sigurd the Mighty himself who delivers the final, decisive blow with his axe. This savage ambush, a masterclass in calculated deception, serves as a stark revelation about the true nature of the Orkney Vikings. Their conquest of the formidable North Sea was not achieved through conventional notions of honor or fair combat. Instead, it was a triumph forged by meticulous calculation and a relentless, unyielding pragmatism. While countless other Viking factions pursued glory and renown in the heat of battle, the shrewd Earls of Orkney harbored a singular, unshakable ambition, absolute and unchallenged domination. Before we delve deeper into these enthralling, yet often forgotten, sagas of survival and immense suffering, I invite you, if you share a passion for uncovering the hidden truths and untold chapters of history, to consider showing your support by hitting that like button and subscribing for more compelling content of this nature. Furthermore, please take a moment to leave a comment below and let me know your geographical location. I find it genuinely remarkable, and truly inspiring, that we are collectively unearthing and exploring these ancient narratives from myriad corners of the globe, intrinsically linked across vast expanses of time and space by our shared, insatiable curiosity about the profound human drama of the past. To truly grasp how a seemingly insignificant island chain could spawn such formidable and ruthless warriors, one must entirely cast aside contemporary geographical perspectives. Cease to envision Orkney as merely a distant, picturesque vacation retreat. Instead, endeavor to perceive it through the strategic, predatory gaze of a pirate. Literally, turn the map upside down. For any Viking longship embarking on a westward journey from Norway, Orkney represents the absolute first, and most crucial, landfall. It stands as the undisputed strategic chokehold of the entire North Atlantic, dictating access and control. Commanding Orkney meant commanding the veritable grand central station of the entire Viking Age. Its islands sat directly atop the most vital trade routes leading to flourishing lands like Ireland, the rugged Hebrides, and the wealthy kingdoms of England. Crucially, these islands also presented an unparalleled natural strategic asset, Scapa Flow. This colossal, naturally sheltered harbor possessed the capacity to conceal an astonishing 1,000 warships, empowering the Orkney Earls to launch devastating raids anywhere across Britain and then, with breathtaking speed, to vanish back into the mists before the smoke of their attacks had even fully dispersed. Yet, this formidable island fortress was far from uninhabited upon the arrival of the Vikings. It was the ancient homeland of the Picts. However, a glance at any contemporary map of Orkney reveals a chilling truth: the Picts are conspicuously absent. They were not merely vanquished in battle, they were, in essence, erased, utterly deleted from the historical record and the genetic landscape. This profound disappearance is often referred to as the silent vanishing. While direct written accounts of the war that obliterated them are tragically non-existent, the stark, irrefutable crime scene evidence lies embedded within the very DNA of modern Arcadians. Recent genetic studies conducted on Orkney's population unveil a truly terrifying anomaly. An examination of the female lineage reveals deep, ancient local roots, yet the indigenous male bloodline was eradicated with almost 100% totality. This grim genetic evidence strongly suggests a land taking of unparalleled and absolute violence. The Pictish men were not merely defeated, they were systematically slaughtered, their numbers reduced to near extinction. Their women, in a tragic pattern of conquest, were taken by the invaders. The vibrant Pictish culture, centuries in the making, was ruthlessly overwritten and effaced. Within the span of a single generation, ancient Pictish stone towers were transformed into functional Viking farmhouses, and their intricate, meaningful art was reduced to mere Viking rubble, its significance utterly lost. From this chilling foundation, built upon an act of ethnic cleansing and secured through unparalleled geographical dominance, the powerful Earls of Orkney ascended. While nominally considered servants of the Norwegian king, their allegiance was largely theoretical. In practice, they operated as fiercely independent warlords. They meticulously forged a formidable maritime empire, one that functioned with all the autonomy and assertive ambition of a true rogue state. Sigurd the Mighty, the architect of that infamous, deceitful horse count, stands as the inaugural grand architect of this nascent pirate kingdom. After the ruthless massacre of Maelbrigt's forces, Sigurd didn't merely depart the blood-soaked scene. With a chilling display of barbaric triumph, he decapitated his vanquished rival and, as the ultimate, gruesome trophy, lashed the severed head to his saddle. He then rode away in a cacophony of cheers, the lifeless head grotesquely bouncing against his leg with every stride. This was, without question, the ultimate act of audacious disrespect and macabre intimidation. Yet, Sigurd's overwhelming arrogance tragically blinded him to a fundamental biological reality. A severed head, particularly one from a freshly deceased body, teems with countless bacteria. As he galloped away in what he believed was unbridled triumph, the buck-toothed head of Maelbrigt swung violently, and one of its infamous teeth, ironically, grazed and scratched Sigurd's calf. The battle itself may have concluded, but the unseen, insidious killing was far from over. The first formidable Earl of Orkney was about to discover, in the most brutal fashion, that within the merciless new order he had established, even the dead could, quite literally, bite back with fatal consequences. The demise of Sigurd the Mighty remains one of history's most darkly ironic tales, a grim jest played out by fate itself. As he triumphantly rode away from the blood-soaked scene of the massacre, the severed head of Maelbrigt grotesquely bouncing against his leg, that notorious bucktooth scraped his skin. It was, seemingly, nothing more than a superficial graze. But in the unforgiving 9th century, the age of antibiotics was centuries away. There was only the inexorable hand of fate. The virulent bacteria from the dead man's mouth infiltrated Sigurd's bloodstream through that tiny wound. Within a mere few days, his leg swelled grotesquely, reaching the horrifying size of a tree trunk. A raging fever consumed him, and the once great conqueror succumbed, dying delirious and visibly rotting from the inside out. His remains were interred unceremoniously on the banks of the river Oikel. He had decisively won the battle, but, in the cruelest twist, the very corpse of his vanquished enemy had ultimately won the war. Sigurd's abrupt and ignominious death unleashed a terrifying power vacuum within the burgeoning earldom. The Earls of Orkney were never intended to form a stable, dynastic monarchy. Rather, they operated more akin to a predatory pack of wolves. When their alpha falls, the pack inevitably turns on itself in a brutal struggle for dominance. Indeed, Sigurd's son inherited the title but tragically died childless soon after. Some chroniclers attribute his demise to natural causes, while others grimly hint that the insidious poison cup had already become a fashionable, silent tool of succession. Consequently, the jarldom reverted back to the ancestral family in Norway, specifically to the formidable sons of Ragnvald, a trusted ally and friend of King Harald Fairhair. This turbulent succession brings us to the unlikely emergence of one of the most improbable figures, a veritable hero or perhaps anti-hero, in the annals of Viking history. His name was Einar. The youngest son of Ragnvald, his birth was humble, stemming from a slave woman. The ancient sagas paint a rather unflattering portrait of him, describing him as physically ugly, tragically one-eyed, and profoundly unloved by his own father. When the tumultuous chaos within Orkney urgently demanded a new, firm hand to guide it, Ragnvald cast a dismissive glance upon his slave-born son and, in essence, delivered a brutally candid instruction: "You shall go. And if, perchance, you never return, rest assured I shall harbor no sorrow." Einar embarked on his westward voyage to Orkney not with the proud bearing of a prince, but with the grim status of an exile. He landed in a territory that was inherently treacherous and unforgiving. The wind in Orkney is a ceaseless, relentless force, mercilessly scouring the landscape and utterly preventing the growth of trees. This presented an existential crisis for any Viking society. Lacking timber, they were unable to construct essential longships, nor could they build the great halls central to their communal life. Most critically, without wood, they couldn't sustain the intensely hot fires required to smelt iron for tools and weapons, or even to simply keep from freezing to death during the interminable, brutal winters. Orkney, for all its strategic advantages, was effectively a frozen desert, a barren expanse challenging survival itself. Yet Einar possessed an extraordinary quality that eluded all the other warlords vying for power: an ingenious engineer's mind. Where others saw only boggy, unproductive, and ignored wetlands, he perceived a boundless source of energy. With his keen insight, he meticulously instructed the islanders on how to harvest the very earth itself, showing them how to systematically dig up the thick, ancient, compressed layers of peat. He then demonstrated the crucial processes of drying and burning it. What might appear, at first glance, to be a mundane technical detail was, in fact, nothing less than a profound revolution. Peat, when properly prepared, burns with a fierce heat and an enduring slowness. Suddenly, and miraculously, Orkney was endowed with an almost limitless supply of essential fuel. This single innovation proved so utterly transformative and defining that history itself bestowed upon him a new name. He became universally known as Thorfinar, or Turfinar, forever linked to his greatest achievement. With the existential energy crisis decisively resolved, Einar, with his singular, focused vision, turned his attention towards the daunting task of consolidation. He transcended the typical role of a mere Viking raider. He began to truly govern, establishing a fragile yet growing stability. However, this nascent order was gravely imperiled by the formidable superpower situated to the east, Norway. King Harald Fairhair had successfully unified Norway under his formidable rule, but his numerous sons proved to be violent, utterly entitled princes who roamed the northern seas, sowing widespread havoc. Driven by an insatiable jealousy over Orkney's newfound wealth and strategic importance, 2 of these royal sons brutally murdered Einar's father back in Norway, and then, with predatory intent, set their sights upon Einar himself. This escalating tension inevitably culminated in a confrontation that would starkly define the savage brutality prevalent in Viking Age Scotland. One of King Harold's ambitious sons, Halfdan Longleg, successfully seized Orkney, compelling Einar to retreat and seek refuge on the Scottish mainland. Yet, Einar was a strategist, playing a patient, long game. He shrewdly bided his time, waiting for the harsh grip of winter and its accompanying ferocious storms to utterly isolate the islands. Then, under the cloak of darkness and blizzard, he launched a devastating and entirely unexpected night attack, turning the tables on his usurper. Einar, in a stunning display of strategic brilliance and tenacity, successfully captured Halfdan Longleg alive on the remote island of North Ronaldsay. Now, pause to truly envision the gravity of this situation. Einar was a bastard earl, a slave-born son fighting for his tenuous hold on power. Halfdan, conversely, was a direct royal heir, the son of the most formidable and powerful king in the entirety of the Viking world. The conventional, politically astute move would have been to demand an immense ransom for such a high-value captive. But Einar harbored no interest in mere gold or riches. His ambition was far grander. He intended to send an unequivocal, visceral message directly to Norway: leave us alone, or face devastating consequences. According to the chilling accounts of the Orkneyinga saga, Einar then proceeded to perform the infamous blood eagle ritual upon the captured king's son. For centuries, historians have engaged in fervent debate as to whether this gruesome ritual was a historical reality, or merely a terrifying literary embellishment. Regardless, the saga vividly describes it with an unsettling, almost anatomical precision. Einar knelt upon his enemy's prone back, systematically severed the ribs from the spine using a sharpened sword, and then, with horrifying deliberation, pulled the victim's lungs out through the gaping wounds, arranging them draped over the shoulders like a grotesque pair of bloodied wings. This ghastly offering, a sacrifice of the highest order, was dedicated to Odin, the unpredictable god of madness, poetry, and war. Whether the blood eagle was a literal act of torture or a potent, terrifying metaphor, its message resonated with undeniable force. When King Harald Fairhair received the horrific news of his son's fate, he did not, as might be expected, launch a vengeful armada to utterly annihilate Einar. Instead, he personally journeyed to Orkney, assessed Einar's formidable defenses and the resolute will of the Arcadians, and surprisingly, agreed to settle the matter with a hefty fine of 60 marks of gold. Einar, without hesitation, paid the sum. Through an act of such extreme and calculated violence, he had, in essence, brutally purchased the fiercely guarded independence of his earldom. Under the iron-willed leadership of Thorfeinar, the nascent pirate kingdom of Orkney was not merely established but profoundly solidified. They now possessed a sustainable, indeed almost limitless, fuel source, securing their long-term survival. Their fearsome reputation, earned through acts of ruthless pragmatism, was so widespread and terrifying that it successfully deterred even powerful kings from encroaching upon their domain. More than that, they had forged a distinct new identity. No longer were they merely Norwegians living abroad, they were proudly Arcadians. Through strategic intermarriage with the indigenous nobility of Scotland, they began to cultivate a unique, hybrid aristocracy, a potent blend that was part Viking, part Gael, embodying the strength of both cultures. This remarkable fusion of cultures and strategic prowess gave birth to a truly unique political entity. The wily earls began to expertly play both sides, masterfully navigating the treacherous political waters of the North Sea. To the powerful King of Norway, they would humbly bow and pledge their formidable ships. To the Scottish monarch, they would likewise offer obeisance and promise vital protection. In truth, however, they served neither, loyal only to their burgeoning ambitions. They were, in fact, assiduously constructing a formidable commercial empire. The archaeological hoards unearthed from this period offer staggering evidence of their prosperity. Caches of silver arm rings, deliberately and roughly chopped into pieces, known as hack silver, to be used as readily available currency. This tangible proof demonstrates conclusively that Orkney boasted a sophisticated cash economy centuries before such a system was widely adopted across the rest of Scotland. However, as Orkney's wealth and influence expanded, so too did the geopolitical stakes. The pioneering era of formidable earls like Thorfeinar, who built their power through innovation and raw force, was slowly drawing to a close. A new age was dawning, the era of the cunning politician earls, who navigated power through diplomacy and manipulation. While the ancient pagan ways still held sway, and toasts to Odin frequently echoed through the great halls, an inexorable new force was subtly, yet powerfully, creeping north, the encroaching shadow of the Christian cross. The subsequent grand chapter of Orkney's history would be irrevocably shaped by a profound clash of faiths, embodied by a resolute man who would endeavor to cling to the old gods with an unyielding, iron grip. This resolute figure was Sigurd the Stout. And in stark contrast to Thorfeinar, who meticulously constructed his formidable power base upon the twin pillars of peat and shrewd pragmatism, Sigurd would instead forge his dominion upon the ethereal foundations of ancient magic. He possessed a potent, mystical totem, a legendary raven banner, intricately woven by his mother with a dark, ominous prophecy embedded within its very threads. It made a chilling promise, absolute victory to the army that dared to unfurl it in battle, but an inescapable, certain death to the courageous, or cursed, man who bore it. This was, unequivocally, a profound deal with destiny, a pact with forces both dark and potent, and Sigurd was poised to irrevocably sign it. If Thorfinar represented the strategic intellect and engineering prowess behind Orkney's early ascendants, his formidable descendant, Sigurd Hlodverson, far more widely recognized as Sigurd the Stout, embodied its raw power, its unwavering determination, and indeed, its very soul. Sigurd was the quintessential archetypal Viking warlord, a man of immense physical strength, distinguished by a flowing, formidable beard, and driven by an insatiable hunger for land and dominion that proved utterly unquenchable. By the close of the 10th century, his authority extended far beyond the immediate shores of Orkney. He exerted undisputed control over the rugged Hebrides, the strategic Isle of Man, and vast, significant territories across northern Scotland. For all intents and purposes, and in every practical sense, he reigned as a true king. However, Sigurd's formidable power stemmed not merely from the strength of his steel, or the might of his warriors. It was rooted in something far more ancient, something imbued with otherworldly potency. The sagas whisper that Sigurd's mother was no ordinary mortal woman. She was, reputedly, the daughter of an Irish king and, more importantly, a sorceress of immense power and dark renown. As Sigurd made ready to confront a formidable challenger in Scotland, he sought counsel from his enigmatic mother. She offered him no conventional battle strategy, no tactical advice. Instead, she presented him with a simple, yet profoundly charged, piece of woven cloth. This was the fabled raven banner itself, exquisitely woven, depicting a formidable black raven, the sacred, ominous bird of Odin, seemingly poised and floating effortlessly upon the wind. His mother declared, "I have crafted this banner for you with every ounce of skill I possess. It is imbued with a most potent and specific enchantment. It promises ultimate victory to the army before whom it is carried, yet it guarantees an inescapable, certain death to the man who dares to bear it into battle. Victory for the collective army, but an unavoidable demise for the individual standard-bearer." It was a chilling, yet highly effective, tactical pact with fate itself. Sigurd, with a blend of determination and perhaps grim resignation, accepted the banner. In his subsequent battle, the eerie prophecy held chillingly true. The Scots were utterly routed and put to flight, but the warrior proudly bearing the banner was instantly struck down by a fatal arrow. In the very next engagement, the exact same, grim pattern repeated itself: triumph for Sigurd, but a fresh grave for the flag-bearer. The raven banner swiftly became the most feared and paradoxically coveted object across the entire North Sea, transforming into a stark symbol of Orkney's dark and powerful pact with the ancient, unyielding gods. But even as Sigurd was triumphantly securing his dominion through the potent, unsettling magic of his pagan heritage, a new and entirely different kind of power was inexorably making its way from the eastern horizons. Christianity was coming, not as a gentle suggestion or a humble request, but as an uncompromising, surging force, demanding absolute conversion. In the pivotal year 995, the formidable Norwegian king Olaf Tryggvason descended upon Orkney. Olaf was not merely a Christian, he was a zealous, fervent evangelist, arriving with a gleaming sword in one hand and a holy Bible clutched in the other, ready to enforce his faith. He extended an invitation to Sigurd to join him aboard his ship within the harbor of Osmanwall, an invitation that, in truth, was a meticulously orchestrated trap. Encircled by King Olaf's imposing royal guards, Sigurd was presented with a stark, brutal ultimatum: either submit to baptism, bringing all of his subjects into the Christian faith with him, or face immediate execution on the spot, followed by the complete ravaging of his islands with unsparing fire and unforgiving steel. To ensure Sigurd's reluctant compliance, King Olaf brutally seized Sigurd's young son, Hundi, holding him as a vulnerable hostage. Sigurd, trapped and cornered, cast a desperate glance at the overwhelming armada surrounding his ship, then, with profound anguish, turned his gaze to his terrified son. He had no choice but to bend the knee. He formally accepted the baptismal water on his forehead, a public declaration of conversion. Yet, as the sacred water dripped slowly down his face, the sagas powerfully suggest that his heart remained as cold and unyielding as stone. He had converted for purely political expediency, but in the deepest spiritual sense, he remained the untamed, pagan warrior, the very man of the raven banner. The profound, simmering tension between the White Christ and the ancient Red Thor continued to churn within Sigurd's heart and veins, a silent struggle of faiths, until the fateful year 1014. This date marks the infamous Battle of Clontarf in Dublin, Ireland, an epic, cataclysmic clash often referred to as the Twilight of the Gods. It was a massive, sprawling coalition war, the venerable High King of Ireland, Brian Boru, pitted against a formidable rebel alliance comprising the Dublin Vikings and, critically, Sigurd the Stout and his Arcadian forces. Sigurd arrived in Dublin with his formidable fleet, and inevitably, the ominous Raven banner flew proudly among his ships. On the solemn day of Good Friday, April 23, the vast, opposing armies collided in a cataclysmic fury. The battlefield swiftly devolved into an absolute slaughterhouse, a scene of unimaginable carnage. Contemporary descriptions of Clontarf speak of an apocalyptic pandemonium, with warriors locked in desperate combat, even fighting amidst the churning surf, where many ultimately drowned in a horrific mixture of their own blood and the unforgiving salt water. Amidst the frenzied heat of the battle's chaos, the chilling curse of the Raven banner dramatically activated. The very first warrior chosen to carry Sigurd's formidable flag was instantly, brutally cut down. Sigurd, roaring above the din of battle, commanded a second warrior to seize the fallen standard. He obeyed, only to be impaled and skewered mere moments later. Undeterred, Sigurd bellowed for a third man, a seasoned warrior named Rafn the Red, to take up the cursed ensign. But Rafn, witnessing the grim, undeniable pattern of death, defiantly yelled back, "Bear your own devil yourself, Earl." Sigurd the Stout found himself standing isolated, utterly alone, amidst the collapsing center of his shield wall. The tide of battle was decisively turning against his forces. His gaze fell upon the cursed flag, now lying discarded in the bloody mud, a potent symbol of his mother's dark magic, an emblem of his very pagan identity. He faced a stark, agonizing choice: to retreat and preserve his life, or to seize the banner, accept its terrible prophecy, and face certain death. With a defiant, resolute act, Sigurd ripped the tattered flag from its staff and, instead of holding it aloft, tucked it tightly into his clothing, becoming its final, tragic standard-bearer. Almost instantaneously, a spear pierced his body, followed swiftly by a fatal sword thrust. The mighty Earl of Orkney collapsed, his lifeblood spilling onto the Irish soil, clutching the Raven banner, his dark pact, to his dying chest. Sigurd's army suffered a crushing defeat. The revered Irish High King, Brian Boru, also met his end on that same fateful day. Clontarf was far more than a mere battle. It marked the cataclysmic conclusion of an entire era. With Sigurd's dramatic death, the age of the audacious Viking raider in Orkney began its slow, inevitable fade. The overt, potent pagan magic that had defined his reign, and indeed, much of the Orkney Vikings' early power, perished with him on that blood-soaked Irish field. Yet, the dominion of Orkney did not simply crumble. Instead, it underwent a profound evolution. The sons who ascended to power in the wake of Sigurd would prove not to be sorcerers wielding ancient magic, but ruthless politicians and pragmatic kinslayers. It is at this juncture that the Orkneyinga saga notably shifts its narrative tone. We transition from the mythic, legendary tales to a starkly Machiavellian reality. The power vacuum violently created by Sigurd's demise unleashed a brutal and merciless civil war among his sons, a veritable Game of Thrones played out amidst the freezing mud and unforgiving winds of the north, a struggle so savage it would make the fictional Lannisters appear as mere amateurs. This turbulent interlude now sets the stage for the emergence of perhaps the most complex and strategically brilliant character in our entire saga. He was a man described as physically small, possessing dark hair, and notably, he was potentially the grandson of a Scottish king. Unlike his predecessors, he would not require a cursed magic flag or any supernatural aid to secure victory. Instead, he wielded an unparalleled, empire-building mind, a strategic acumen that would rival even that of a Caesar. His name was Thorfinn the Mighty. And he was poised to transform the vast, turbulent North Sea into his own undisputed, private domain. The profound death of Sigurd the Stout at the Battle of Clontarf was more than the mere end of a man's life. it utterly shattered the fragile political stability that had precariously held sway across the north. In the cutthroat world of Viking warlords, succession is almost never a matter of amicable agreement or a simple handshake. It is, invariably, a brutal cage fight for dominance. And Sigurd, in his demise, bequeathed a dynastic mess so entangled and savage that it would undoubtedly make even the most imaginative writers of Game of Thrones blush with envy and horror. Sigurd left behind not one, but 4 sons, each with their own claim and ambition. 3 of these, Sumarliti, Brusi, and Einar, were full-blooded Norsemen, already grown men, fiercely primed to tear each other apart for even the smallest slice of the coveted earldom. Yet, there was a crucial 4th son, a mere boy of 5 years old, named Thorfinn. Thorfinn was distinctly different, set apart by his unique heritage. His mother was not a Norse woman, but rather a Scottish princess, none other than the daughter of the formidable King Malcolm II of Scotland. This mixed bloodline, a potent blend of Norse and Scottish royalty, dramatically altered the course of events. While his older, full-blooded half-brothers viciously squabbled and fought over the barren, rocky islands of Orkney, young Thorfinn, still a child, was strategically dispatched to the sophisticated Scottish court. There, he was deliberately raised not in the brutal tradition of a pirate, but with the refined education and expectations of a prince. He meticulously learned the intricate art of statecraft, diplomacy, and governance from the Scots, while his brothers, back in the harsh fjords, perfected only the brutal art of fratricide. Back in Orkney, far from the Scottish court, the political situation rapidly deteriorated into outright chaos. The islands were brutally carved into 3 warring thirds. The brother who, through sheer ruthlessness, swiftly rose to undisputed dominance was Einar, infamously known as Einar Wrymouth. History has justly condemned him as a tyrannical despot, a man who relentlessly taxed his farmers into utter starvation and enforced his brutal rule with unremitting cruelty. The Orkneyinga saga paints a chilling, vivid picture of a land suffocating under a reign of terror, where a deceptively polite dinner invitation often served as a chilling prelude to an inevitable execution. To truly comprehend the sheer, terrifying level of familial dysfunction that plagued this dynasty, one must keenly examine the toxic atmosphere pervading the Orkney court. It was a place where sacred family bonds were utterly meaningless, completely overshadowed by the relentless, all-consuming pursuit of power. This particular bloodline, infamous in the sagas, is one where, in later, darker chapters, we encounter the chilling tale of the poisoned shirt, a legend that starkly encapsulates the pervasive paranoia and ruthless ambition characteristic of Orkney. The gruesome legend recounts the deeds of 2 aristocratic sisters, Frackic and Helga, who conspired to assassinate their rival, Earl Paul, thereby clearing a brutal path for their own progeny to ascend. They employed no blunt sword or obvious dagger. Instead, their weapons were a delicate needle and thread. With insidious intent, they meticulously crafted a magnificent linen shirt, exquisitely embroidered with gold, yet secretly saturated with a lethal, insidious toxin. The garment was so breathtakingly beautiful that it proved utterly irresistible. But in a cruel twist of tragic irony, it was not their intended enemy who discovered it. It was Helga's own beloved son, Earl Harold. Captivated by the shirt's splendor, he admired its beauty, and, despite his mother's frantic, desperate screams to immediately discard it, he donned the garment. The saga vividly describes his agonizing demise in horrific detail. His flesh began to burn with an internal fire, his body swelled monstrously, and he died in prolonged, unbearable agony, a victim of his own mother's cold, ruthless ambition. While that specific, horrifying tragedy unfolded a few generations subsequent to Sigurd's era, the very seeds of such dynastic madness were undoubtedly sown right here, in the profound, volatile vacuum left by his death. The chilling message, etched into the very fabric of Arcadian power politics, was unequivocally clear. In Orkney, one dared not trust their brother, one dared not trust their mother, and one most certainly dared not trust any gift, however seemingly benign or beautiful. Einar Wrymouth, lost in his tyrannical delusions, was about to learn this brutal lesson firsthand and in the most unforgiving manner. His relentless tyranny had, predictably, generated a host of formidable enemies, most notably a powerful chieftain named Thorkel. This Thorkel, significantly, was the foster father of the now growing young Thorfinn, a man of immense influence and cunning. Thorkel was, in essence, the kingmaker of this saga, a shrewd strategist who had come to the chilling realization that the only viable path to personal survival, amidst Einar's murderous reign, was to preemptively eliminate the tyrant himself. The inevitable climax of this simmering conflict unfolded dramatically at a feast held in Sandwich. In traditional Viking culture, feasts were considered sacred zones of inviolable peace. One broke bread and shared ale, one did not break skulls. Yet, the ruthless Orkney Vikings, ever pragmatic, had long since rewritten these ancient rules of engagement. Thorkel, with calculated audacity, arrived at Einar's hall accompanied by the crews of 3 formidable ships. Einar, observing the unexpected numbers, sensed an underlying wrongness, a palpable tension, but the sacrosanct laws of hospitality compelled him to offer welcome. They sat down, ostensibly to drink and parley. As the ale flowed freely and the night deepened, Thorkel patiently, meticulously waited for his opportune moment. The saga recounts the scene with a chilling, almost cinematic tension. Einar, his suspicions slowly mounting, began to strongly intuit a trap. He turned, perhaps, to his men, contemplating an order for an immediate arrest. But Thorkel proved devastatingly faster. He did not signal a chaotic, messy brawl. Instead, with disarming calm, he simply stood, walked deliberately over to the Earl's chair as if to impart a hushed confidence, and with brutal precision, buried an axe deep into Einar Rymouth's unsuspecting head. An immediate, profound silence descended upon the great hall, thick with shock and dread. In virtually any other civilized kingdom, such an act would be branded as unthinkable treason, deserving of the most severe retribution. But in Orkney? Here, it was simply politics, a brutal, undeniable reality of power. Thorkel, with unnerving calm, surveyed the stunned faces and declared that he had, in fact, performed a great service for the islands. And in a grim, undeniable sense, he was entirely correct. With Einar violently dead and the other brother, Samarlidi, conveniently dying of an undisclosed illness, the tumultuous path to a new order was, at last, brutally cleared. The political board in Orkney was now decisively reset, ready for a new player. Brusi, the sole remaining brother, was known as a man of peace, often described as meek, compliant, and readily willing to compromise. He surveyed the chaotic aftermath, the stark reality of Einar's demise, and then turned his gaze towards the formidable young man now making his triumphant return from Scotland, Thorfinn. Thorfinn was no longer the 5-year-old boy dispatched from Orkney. He had matured into a shrewd and powerful young man, returning now with the full, unwavering military might of the King of Scotland behind him. He did not arrive to politely negotiate for a mere third of the earldom, as was his inherited right. He arrived with a singular, unyielding ambition, to seize absolute control and take it all. This pivotal moment heralds the true ascent of the apex predator of the North Sea. Thorfinn Sigurdsson, universally known as Thorfinn the Mighty, defied the conventional image of a typical Viking hero. The Sagas, in their brutal honesty, describe him as uncommonly short, thick-set, with hair as black as pitch and sharp, almost ugly features. He bore no resemblance to the idealized, golden-haired Norse gods of legend. Instead, he looked like a rough-hewn, immovable boulder. Yet, beneath that formidable, almost brutish exterior resided a mind sharper and more cunning than any forged axe blade. Thorfinn possessed a rare and potent duality that rendered him exceptionally dangerous. He inherited the unbridled Viking ferocity and warrior spirit of his father, Sigurd, yet he was equally endowed with the sophisticated political cunning and strategic acumen of his Scottish grandfather. He profoundly understood that to truly dominate and rule the vast, strategic expanse of the North Sea, one could not simply remain a mere, opportunistic raider. One had to think and act with the comprehensive vision and absolute authority of an emperor. With ruthless determination and sheer force of will, Thorfinn successfully bullied his remaining, more compliant brother, Brusi, into effectively relinquishing all power. He then swiftly and decisively annexed the islands, bringing them together under his singular, iron-fisted rule for the first time in many decades. But Thorfinn's burgeoning ambition knew no bounds. It certainly did not cease at the rocky shoreline of Orkney. His gaze turned southward, scanning the fragmented and often warring clans of Scotland, and in their disunity, he saw not weakness, but unparalleled opportunity. The brutal Game of Thrones within Orkney was now definitively over. The destructive civil war had finally concluded. The ultimate victor was the dark-haired boy, once fostered in the Scottish court, now a formidable man. And with the earldom firmly in his grasp, he was poised to unleash a relentless campaign of expansion so vast and aggressive that it would render his powerful ancestors' conquests appear as mere, petty thievery. Thorfinn was on the verge of forging a dominion so immense and influential that he would forever be remembered not merely as an earl, but unequivocally as the Caesar of the North. However, to not only forge but to truly maintain such an expansive and ambitious empire, one requires far more than just a multitude of seasoned soldiers. One absolutely necessitates a robust and functioning economy, a resilient and efficient supply chain. And perhaps most crucially of all, one must possess an intrinsic, unparalleled understanding of the sea itself, an understanding that surpasses that of any rival or contemporary. Imagine stepping into a bustling tavern in Orkney around the year 1040. You might encounter a man seated in the chieftain's high seat, a figure who, by conventional standards, bore little resemblance to a regal king. The Sagas, with their characteristic bluntness, offer a rather unvarnished description of Thorfinn Sigurdsson. They do indeed bestow upon him the epithet the Mighty, yet they also portray him as uncommonly tall and physically powerful, but simultaneously ugly, possessing a dark, swarthy complexion, sharp, almost menacing features, and an imposing, massive black beard. He presented the very image of a formidable villain. And indeed, if you were to inquire among the contemporary Scots, he would undoubtedly have been branded as such. However, if you consult certain historical texts and academic theories, he might, astonishingly, be a character already deeply familiar to you. For centuries, a tantalizing historical theory has persisted, circulating like a hushed whisper in the margins of academic discourse. It boldly posits that Thorfinn the Mighty might well have served as the profound inspiration for, or perhaps even been the very same historical individual as, none other than Shakespeare's legendary Macbeth. Consider the compelling evidence. The historical King Macbeth, or Mac Bedhad, and Earl Thorfinn were indeed contemporaries, living and reigning in the same turbulent era. Furthermore, they were directly related, being cousins. Crucially, both men harbored a deep, mutual animosity towards the then-ruling King of Scotland, Duncan. The Orkney Saga explicitly recounts that Thorfinn waged a massive, protracted war against the Scottish king it names Carl Hundison. For years, historians have puzzled and scratched their heads over this enigmatic name, as Carl Hundison simply does not appear in any Scottish royal records. Its rough translation, peasant son of a dog, clearly indicates it was intended as a derogatory insult, not a proper regnal name. Today, the overwhelming consensus among modern scholars is that this son of a dog was, in fact, none other than King Duncan himself. So, while Shakespeare presented us with 3 cackling witches and a phantom dagger, the unvarnished truth of history introduces us to Thorfinn. When King Duncan audaciously demanded tribute from Orkney's territories in Caithness, Thorfinn's response was not a payment of gold. Instead, he dispatched an entire naval fleet. The decisive moment of this confrontation was not some poetic duel within a castle's walls. It was a brutal naval slaughter off the coast of Deerness. Thorfinn, despite being outmatched, strategically lashed his ships together to forge an unyielding, floating platform of death. He personally led the charge, boarding the Scottish king's flagship and savagely clearing its deck with his axe. King Duncan, the figure Shakespeare paints as a gentle, elderly grandfather, was forced to flee for his very life, only to meet his end later. Regardless of whether Thorfinn himself delivered the fatal blow or if his cousin Macbeth did, the ultimate outcome remained unchanged. The Scottish crown was shattered, and the dominion of the North unequivocally belonged to Orkney. In that pivotal moment, Thorfinn earned his epithet as the Caesar of the North. The sheer scope of his domain was truly astonishing. We are speaking of a man who governed from a relatively small island in the vast North Sea, yet effectively commanded all of the Hebrides, the Isle of Man, immense portions of Ireland, and, as chronicled in the Sagas, 9 distinct earldoms within Scotland. He, in fact, controlled more Scottish territory than the King of Scotland himself. Under Thorfinn's formidable leadership, Orkney shed its identity as a mere pirate outpost and evolved into a veritable empire. He moved beyond simple raiding. He established sophisticated administration. He implemented a robust legal framework that brought stability to what had been a turbulent and chaotic region. Yet, perhaps the most astounding demonstration of his authority wasn't witnessed on any battlefield. It was, surprisingly, his journey of spiritual reflection. In the year 1050, precisely at the zenith of his power, Thorfinn undertook an endeavor utterly unprecedented for a Viking warlord. He ceased all hostilities. He literally washed the blood from his hands, meticulously packed his belongings, and embarked on a pilgrimage to the holy city of Rome. Just try to envision the spectacle. The formidable, unrefined giant from the frigid north, traversing the sun-drenched thoroughfares of Italy. He was granted an audience with the Pope himself. It is also highly probable that he met with the Holy Roman Emperor. This was far more than simply a religious excursion aimed at seeking absolution for a lifetime of burning and killing, although he certainly had ample transgressions to atone for. This was a calculated diplomatic maneuver. By being formally received by the Pope, Thorfinn was broadcasting a clear message to the entire world. I am no mere barbarian. I am a Christian monarch, deserving of equal standing with any king in Europe. He eventually returned to Orkney a profoundly transformed man. The once savage warrior had matured into a visionary state builder. He notably established the first bishopric in Orkney at Barcy, overseeing the construction of a magnificent edifice known as the Christ Church. He also initiated the crucial separation of the church from the state, thereby laying the fundamental groundwork for a more civilized and enduring society that would ultimately outlive the era of relentless Viking raids. It truly is a rare narrative within the often grim annals of Viking history, a truly happy ending. Most legendary heroes like Ragnar or Sigurd typically meet their demise screaming in a snake pit or perishing on a blood-soaked battlefield. Thorfinn the Mighty, however, died peacefully in his own bed, an old man, surrounded by his loving family and his priests, the undisputed master of his meticulously shaped world. But Thorfinn's vast empire, spanning such immense distances, presented a formidable logistical challenge. How could one possibly provision an army stretching from Dublin all the way to Norway? And how could thousands of longships be kept watertight and combat-ready on islands virtually devoid of trees? The answer lay embedded within the astonishing, yet frequently overlooked, longship economy of Orkney. While Thorfinn undoubtedly presented the commanding face of the empire, its true backbone was a sophisticated system of taxation, an intricate network of beacons, and meticulously managed farming practices that collectively transformed these islands into an efficient military machine. To truly grasp why Orkney functioned so effectively, one must shift focus away from the regal throne room and instead observe the humble fields and the flickering beacon fires. To fully appreciate the monumental achievements of Thorfinn the Mighty, one needs only to gaze out a window in Orkney today. A striking absence quickly becomes apparent: trees. Aside from a handful of carefully sheltered pockets, the ceaseless wind in Orkney is simply too salt-laden and ferociously strong for forests to ever truly flourish. This presents a profound historical paradox. The entire Viking Age was intrinsically built upon wood. Longships were crafted from resilient oak and sturdy pine. Houses were constructed from timber. Shields were fashioned from linden wood. Charcoal was an absolute necessity for iron smelting. How, then, could a virtually treeless archipelago possibly emerge as the dominant naval superpower of the North Atlantic? The solution was found in a brilliant, albeit ruthless, logistical system that ingeniously converted the entire island population into a meticulously orchestrated military machine. It was known as the Ledang, and it served as the silent, secret engine powering the Orkney Earls. Orkney was far more than just a scattering of farms. It was, in essence, a naval base cleverly disguised as a functioning society. The islands were systematically divided into distinct tax districts, historically known as ounce lands and penny lands. But the tax demanded was not paid in currency, it was paid in manpower, in crew members. Every single district was legally bound to supply a specific quota of men, weaponry, and provisions for the Earl's formidable fleet, ready at a moment's notice. This was a conscription system so extraordinarily efficient that Thorfinn could mobilize a fleet of massive warships with greater speed than the kings of Scotland could even manage to saddle their horses. But what of the ships themselves? Lacking local forests, the Orkney Vikings evolved into ingenious masters of both recycling and strategic appropriation. They heavily relied on driftwood, which included monumental logs from North America, carried across the vast Atlantic by the powerful Gulf Stream, eventually washing ashore on their beaches. In Orkney, discovering a sizable log on the beach was akin to unearthing a bar of pure gold. However, driftwood alone was insufficient. The saga matter-of-factly notes that the earls would frequently sail to Scotland not to raid for precious gold, but specifically to raid for timber. They would invade the dense forests of Ross, systematically fell the trees belonging to their enemies, and then sail back home to meticulously construct the very ships they would then use to invade again. It was a perfectly self-sustaining, predatory cycle. Once the fleet was assembled, it then required vigilant protection. The Orkney Vikings conceived and implemented a sophisticated surveillance system that remarkably predated the invention of the telegraph by a full 1,000 years. If you examine a modern map of Orkney today, you will observe that the highest point on nearly every single island bears the distinctive name of Ward Hill. This is no mere coincidence. These elevated points were precisely the locations designated for the beacon fires. The system itself was deceptively simple yet terrifyingly swift in its execution. A lone watchman stationed on Fair Isle, strategically positioned halfway to Shetland, would spot an enemy sail appearing on the distant horizon. He would promptly ignite his fire. The watchman on North Ronaldsay would then immediately perceive the rising smoke and light his own beacon. This signal would then cascade to Sandy, then to Westray, and so on. Within mere minutes, a clear signal of enemy approaching would race across 70 miles of treacherous ocean, reaching the Earl's Great Hall even before the invading ship had managed to lower its sails. By the time any invader finally made landfall, the beaches were already bristling with axe-wielding warriors awaiting their arrival. It was, quite literally, the fiber-optic network of the Dark Ages. This perpetual state of readiness profoundly shaped the daily existence of every man in Orkney. We frequently imagine Vikings as pursuing a full-time profession, but in Orkney, it was primarily a seasonal occupation. The sagas meticulously provide us with a detailed calendar outlining their annual cycle. The Orkney year was characterized by a distinct, almost bipolar existence. In the vibrant spring, the powerful great earls and their most formidable warriors were found on their knees, toiling in the mud, diligently sowing barley and oats. They were, fundamentally, farmers first. Once the precious seed was securely in the ground, the true Viking season would commence. They would launch the spring trip, embarking on raids to the Hebrides and Ireland in search of slaves and silver. They would then return in midsummer to undertake the crucial harvest of their crops, a period marked by relative peace and strenuous labor. Subsequently, once the harvested grain was safely stored, they would launch the autumn trip, a second wave of calculated violence, before the onset of winter storms finally rendered the seas impassable. This inherent dual identity, the farmer and the killer, fostered a truly unique culture. These were not simply mindless berserkers driven by blind rage. They were astute businessmen. They inherently understood the vital necessity of grain to sustain their rowers and silver to adequately compensate them. The very essence of the longship economy revolved around this delicate balance. However, as the 11th century drew to a close, this carefully maintained balance began to irrevocably shift. The burgeoning connections to the wider European world undeniably brought new wealth, but they also introduced an unforeseen layer of complexity. The rough-hewn, pagan-influenced world that Thorfinn had so meticulously crafted was gradually giving way to a more refined, European, and distinctly courtly style. The subsequent generation of earls would no longer be content with mere wooden halls and warning beacon fires. Their aspirations now yearned for the solidity of stone. They desired grand cathedrals. And notably, they sought the ultimate spiritual validation, sainthood. This profound desire for a lasting spiritual legacy would inevitably lead to what would become the most tragic and pivotal moment in the entire history of Orkney. It unfolds as a gripping tale of two cousins, a burgeoning holy war, and a brutal execution that would etch an indelible scar upon the very landscape. The era of the Viking pirate was rapidly drawing to a close. The era of the Viking saint was poised to begin. And its commencement would be marked by a swift axe blow to the head of a man who was, at that very moment, offering prayers for his own killer. By the early 12th century, the intricate Game of Thrones in Orkney had devolved into a perilous stalemate. The earldom was once again fractured, this time split between two cousins who represented absolute polar opposites. On one side stood Hakon Paulson, a traditional, rugged Viking warlord who firmly believed that true power emanated from the sharp edge of a sword. On the other was Magnus Erlendsson, an enigmatic, devoutly pious man who was known to recite psalms even as his men embarked on raids, and who was famously rumored to have remained steadfastly on his ship during a fierce battle, calmly singing hymns while deadly arrows rained down around him. Orkney, it was clear, simply wasn't large enough to accommodate both men. The islands teetered precariously on the precipice of a full-blown civil war. The long-suffering farmers, weary of perpetually shedding their blood for their feuding lords, demanded an immediate settlement. Consequently, in the year 1117, the cousins reluctantly agreed to a peace meeting, to be held on the small, unassuming island of Egilsey. The agreed-upon terms were quite familiar: strict limitations on the number of men and ships each earl could bring. Each earl was to arrive with no more than 2 ships. Magnus, honoring the agreement, arrived first with his 2 ships. He was rowing across a remarkably calm sea, yet as his vessel drew near the island, a colossal wave suddenly struck his boat from out of nowhere. The surrounding waters remained placid everywhere else. Magnus, observing this unsettling phenomenon, looked at the water and somberly declared, "This is an omen. My life is ending." The following morning, Magnus vigilantly scanned the horizon. He witnessed Hakon's fleet approaching. But instead of the agreed-upon 2 ships, there were 8. Their gunwales were bristling with shields. It was a cruel echo of the 40 horses trick of Sigurd the Mighty, replayed 3 centuries later. Betrayal, it seemed, was deeply embedded in the very DNA of the Orkney Earls. Magnus, however, did not flee. He made no attempt to rally his men for a fight. Instead, he calmly proceeded to the small church on the island, offered his prayers, and waited. When Hakon and his soldiers burst in, swords drawn and ready for conflict, they fully anticipated a battle. Instead, they discovered a man who had already quietly accepted his grim fate. The conversation that ensued is recorded as one of the most truly remarkable dialogues in all of Viking literature. Magnus earnestly attempted to spare Hakon from the grievous sin of kinslaying. He presented 3 distinct solutions, each designed to spare his own life. First, he offered to embark on a perpetual pilgrimage to Rome, vowing never to return. Hakon sternly refused. Second, he proposed to be imprisoned in Scotland for the remainder of his life. Again, Hakon refused. Finally, Magnus offered to be maimed, to have his limbs severed or his eyes brutally gouged out, ensuring he would no longer pose any threat, but could live out his days in darkness. Hakon, to everyone's surprise, hesitated. He was, by all accounts, prepared to accept the third, gruesome offer. But the powerful chieftain standing behind him, the veritable deep state of Orkney, stepped forward. They declared, "We will not tolerate 2 earls. One of you must die today." The will of the mob had been unequivocally expressed. Hakon, weak-willed and buckling under immense pressure, reluctantly nodded his assent. Now arose a new problem. Who would actually strike the fatal blow? Killing a praying nobleman in cold blood was considered profoundly bad luck, even among Vikings. Hakon commanded his standard-bearer, a man named Ulfig, to carry out the deed. Ulfig flatly refused. He would bravely fight in battle, he stated, but he would absolutely not act as an executioner. Desperate and consumed by rage, Hakon then seized his cook, a man named Lifalf. Lifalf was no warrior. He was a simple servant whose primary skill was making stew. He was utterly terrified. He began to weep uncontrollably, his entire body shaking violently as he clutched the heavy axe. It was then that Magnus performed an act that transcended and broke the pervasive cycle of violence. He knelt down before the weeping cook and gently comforted him. He spoke. "Wipe your tears, man. It is not you who truly does this, but honor demands it. Stand before me and strike me hard on the head. Do not chop at me like a common thief. I am an earl, and I should die like one." Magnus then prayed, first for Hakon, then for the terrified cook, and finally bowed his head. Lifalf, his hands trembling, raised the axe and delivered a massive, crushing blow to the skull. The saga recounts that a second blow was tragically required to finish the deed. Magnus Erlendsson fell dead. Hakon had technically won. But just as with Sigurd the Mighty, the victory was cursed. The island of Egilsey, typically rocky and barren, purportedly blossomed into lush greenness at the precise spot where Magnus fell. Tales of miracles began to rapidly spread. The blind miraculously regained their sight. The sick found healing at his grave. The martyrdom of Magnus quickly ignited a political firestorm that Hakon found utterly beyond his control. Hakon desperately attempted to rule, but the spectral presence of his martyred cousin proved far louder and more compelling than any of his commands. To appease the burgeoning cult of Magnus, Hakon's son and eventual successor, Earl Ragnvald II, undertook an unprecedented construction. He did not erect a fortress. He built a cathedral. In 1137, the sacred foundation stones were ceremoniously laid for St. Magnus Cathedral in Kirkwall. It emerged as a magnificent masterpiece crafted from striking red sandstone, glowing like a welcoming beacon amidst the often grey northern light. But here lies a truly fascinating economic twist. Ragnvald did not finance this monumental project alone. He extended a remarkable proposition to the farmers of Orkney. If they contributed financially to the cathedral's construction, he would grant them full, unencumbered ownership of their land, thereby abolishing the burdensome feudal taxes. The cathedral, therefore, is far more than simply a religious monument. It stands as a testament to what is arguably the first successful crowdfunding campaign in recorded history. It was built by the people, for the people, designed to honor a man who consciously chose to die rather than ignite a devastating civil war. When one steps inside St. Magnus Cathedral today, they are entering the sole medieval cathedral in Britain founded by a Viking. In 1919, during routine renovations, workers discovered a loose stone within one of the massive pillars. Behind it, they found a small wooden box. Inside was a skull bearing a remarkably clean axe wound, split precisely as the saga had so vividly described. The revered bones of the saint were still there, silently watching over his beloved islands. The death of Magnus signaled a profound turning point. The raw, untamed pagan energy that had defined an era was now being channeled into something considerably more sophisticated. The Orkney Vikings were gradually transforming into cultured European aristocrats. Yet they had by no means lost their inherent sense of adventure. In fact, the succeeding Earl would embark on perhaps the Viking spirit's longest, and undeniably most whimsical, road trip ever conceived, a crusade to Jerusalem that, by many accounts, felt more akin to a rowdy fraternity party than a solemn holy mission. If St. Magnus embodied the very soul of Orkney, then his charismatic nephew, Earl Ragnvald Calle Coulson, unquestionably represented its swagger. Ragnvald was anything but your typical brooding warlord. He was, in essence, the quintessential Renaissance man of the Viking world, even before the Renaissance itself had properly begun. The sagas recount that he proudly boasted of 9 distinct skills. He could master board games, intricately carve runes, avidly read books, skillfully smith metal, expertly ski, accurately shoot, powerfully row, melodically play the harp, and eloquently compose poetry. By the mid-12th century, the traditional raiding lifestyle was increasingly perceived as antiquated. The fashionable pursuit for European nobility had become embarking on a crusade. So, in 1151, Ragnvald made the decision to take the boys on an epic journey. He meticulously gathered 15 longships and hundreds of Orkney's finest young warriors, setting sail for Jerusalem. But this was emphatically not a solemn religious pilgrimage. It was, rather, a truly epic Viking gap year. The Orkney saga describes this remarkable journey in wonderfully hilarious detail. They navigated along the coasts of France and Spain, engaging in battles, certainly, but predominantly immersing themselves in revelry and merriment. The undisputed highlight of the entire trip was not a formidable siege, it was, surprisingly, a passionate flirtation. In the sun-drenched south of France, they made a stop at the impressive castle of Narbonne. There Ragnvald encountered the exquisite Viscountess Ermengarde. Instead of setting her castle ablaze, Ragnvald found himself falling, quite unexpectedly, a little bit in love. He sat comfortably in her grand hall, composing heartfelt love poems in Old Norse that praised her unparalleled beauty, and she, in turn, extended invitations to lavish feasts. It presents a truly surreal image, a Viking earl from the frozen fringes of Scotland, comfortably seated under the Mediterranean sun, reciting eloquent poetry to a sophisticated French noblewoman. This single encounter vividly illustrates just how far the Orkney Vikings had culturally evolved. They were no longer merely outsiders observing from the periphery. They had confidently emerged as influential players on the global stage. They eventually succeeded in reaching the Holy Land, where they famously swam across the River Jordan as a competitive dare and visited its sacred sites. However, on their arduous return journey, winter caught them entirely by surprise. They sailed back towards Orkney amidst the fury of a raging blizzard. Seeking desperately needed shelter from the ferocious storm, they landed near the ancient, monumental stone mound of Maeshowe. Now, Maeshowe is widely recognized today as a masterpiece of Neolithic engineering, an elaborate tomb constructed a staggering 4,000 years before the Vikings ever set foot on Orkney. To Ragnvald and his men, however, it was merely a conveniently located cave. They forcibly broke through its roof to escape the accumulating snow, and spent several days trapped inside while the tempestuous storm raged relentlessly outside. What, one might wonder, happens when you confine a group of bored, testosterone-fueled Viking warriors within a stone chamber for 3 consecutive days? They begin to draw on the walls. Today, Maeshowe contains the single largest collection of runic inscriptions found anywhere outside of Scandinavia. Yet, these are not sacred scriptures or profound philosophical ponderings. They are, quite simply, graffiti. They represent the 12th century equivalent of modern-day tweets, or the casual scribblings found in a bathroom stall. One inscription boldly reads, "Thorny Fed Helgi carved." Another proudly boasts, "These runes were carved by the man most skilled in runes in the Western Ocean." Another simply states, "Ingigirth is the most beautiful of women," a sentiment most likely etched by a love-struck teenager. And my personal favorite, a pure display of unabashed greed. A great treasure is hidden in the Northwest. Archaeologists have, of course, thoroughly checked. There is, alas, no treasure. These unique carvings are incredibly humanizing. They effectively strip away the pervasive myth of the superhuman Viking. Standing inside Maeshowe today, reading these crude jokes and confident boasts, one realizes that these men were, at their core, just ordinary people. They were cold, they were bored, they undoubtedly missed their girlfriends, and above all, they desired to leave an enduring mark, a simple declaration saying, "I was here." But this particular moment within the tomb also served as a powerful metaphor. The Vikings were taking refuge in the venerable ruins of the past, even as the unpredictable forces of the future were irrevocably changing the weather outside. When Ragnvald finally met his end, assassinated, of course, the golden age of the Orkney Earls tragically died with him. The world was fundamentally shifting. The kings of Scotland were steadily consolidating their power, gradually unifying the mainland under a rigid feudal system that had absolutely no tolerance for rogue pirate islands. Concurrently, the kings of Norway were becoming increasingly distant and less invested in vigorously protecting their western colonies. Orkney found itself caught adrift in this monumental geopolitical current. The hard-won independence that formidable figures like Thorfinn and Ragnvald had so passionately fought for was slowly but surely eroding. The longship economy, for all its ingenuity, simply could not compete with the organized feudal armies of the south. The end of the Orkney Viking Age would not arrive with a thunderous bang, or a heroic last stand on a battlefield, or a noble hero dying with a flag clutched in his hand. It would arrive, ironically, with a simple piece of paper. It would arrive with the unresolved matter of an unpaid wedding dowry. The Lion of the North was about to be financially relinquished to the unicorn. The final demise of the Orkney Viking Age did not come with the fearsome roar of a dragon ship. It arrived instead with the quiet, almost imperceptible scratch of a quill upon parchment. But before the politicians could orchestrate the sale of the islands, nature itself had to first break them. In 1349, a ship silently drifted into the bustling harbor of Bergen in Norway. Its entire crew was tragically dead. Its horrifying cargo was the bubonic plague. The Black Death subsequently tore through Norway like an uncontrolled wildfire, claiming the lives of perhaps 2/3 of its total population. The mother country was brought to its knees. The royal house of Norway effectively collapsed, eventually merging into a broader union with Denmark. The iron grip that Oslo had once held on its western colonies, Orkney, Shetland, and the Hebrides, went utterly limp. Orkney was left to drift in this power vacuum. The distinguished line of the great Norse earls, figures like the Thorfinn the Mighties and the Saint Magnus, eventually died out without clear succession. They were subsequently replaced by the Sinclairs, a Scottish noble family who regarded the islands less as a cherished kingdom and more as a personal piggy bank to be exploited. But the final, irrevocable blow to Orkney's independence arrived in 1468, a transaction that remains, to this day, one of the most embarrassing real estate deals in all of history. Enter King Christian I of Denmark and Norway. He was a monarch burdened with an abundance of impressive titles, but critically lacking in actual cash. He desperately needed to arrange a strategic marriage for his daughter, Margaret, to the young King James III of Scotland. This was a calculated power move, intended to secure lasting peace and stability between the two nations. The elaborate marriage contract explicitly stipulated a truly massive dowry, 60,000 florins of the Rhine. Christian, however, did not possess 60,000 florins. He conscientiously checked the royal treasury. It was completely empty. So, much like a desperate man cornered in a pawn shop, he frantically searched for something valuable to collateralize. He offered the Orkney Islands as a pledge for 50,000 florins, solemnly promising to pay the cash later to redeem them. He then painstakingly scraped together the remaining 10,000 florins, but still found himself short. So, for good measure, he unceremoniously threw in the Shetland Islands as well. The pivotal document signed on September 8, 1468, is historically known as the Impignoration. It is absolutely critical to grasp this fundamental point. Christian never actually sold Orkney. He merely mortgaged it. The agreement was crystal clear. As soon as the Danish king repaid the stipulated money, both Orkney and Shetland would revert to Norwegian dominion. King Christian, in all likelihood, fully intended to pay it back. But the Scots harbored entirely different intentions. King James III shrewdly recognized that he had just acquired the strategic key to control the North Sea, and all for the comparatively modest price of a royal wedding party. In 1472, Scotland unilaterally annexed the islands. They blatantly ignored the explicit right of redemption. Successive Danish kings, for centuries thereafter, diligently attempted to buy the islands back. They dispatched letters. They sent skilled diplomats. They even offered substantial amounts of gold. The Scots simply ghosted them. For the people of Orkney, this was nothing short of a catastrophe. They had gone to sleep as loyal subjects of a distant, generally benign Scandinavian crown and abruptly awoke to find themselves under the oppressive heel of the Scottish feudal system. The contrast was brutally stark. Under the venerable Old Norse Udal law, the farmers of Orkney owned their land absolutely and unequivocally. They recognized no feudal overlord. They did not pay rent to a master. Instead, they paid a direct tax to the king, but the very soil beneath their feet was intrinsically theirs. It was, in essence, a society comprised entirely of freemen. The Scots, however, imposed feudal law. Under this new, harsh system, the king owned everything. The proud farmers were summarily demoted to mere tenants on their own ancestral fields. The century that followed this annexation is notoriously known in Orkney history as the era of the tyrant earls, specifically referring to the Stuart earls, Robert and Patrick. These men, who were illegitimate cousins of Mary Queen of Scots, shamelessly treated Orkney not as a respected part of a kingdom, but rather as a personal slave colony. They mercilessly coerced the free Udal farmers into forced labor. They seized valuable land using meticulously forged documents. They constructed massive, imposing fortified palaces, such as the Earl's Palace in Kirkwall, utilizing what amounted to outright slave labor. If one visits that majestic ruin today, it stands as a sight of stunning beauty, yet local residents will somberly inform you that it was built on blood. Patrick Stuart's paranoia and despotic rule eventually pushed the islanders beyond their breaking point. He was ultimately executed in Edinburgh in 1615, not for his cruel oppression of the peasants, a matter about which the king had little concern, but rather for the grave offense of treason against the crown. But the damage, alas, was done. The Viking Age had definitively ended. The Norn language, the melodic Norse dialect spoken by the islanders for centuries, began its slow, inevitable decline, gradually being replaced by Scots. The ancient laws were systematically eroded. The once proud longships slowly rotted on the beaches, replaced by humble fishing boats. Yet, despite the legal annexation, despite the profound language shift, despite the brutal feudal oppression, something tenacious endured. The impignoration was never legally reversed. Technically, to this very day, a legal argument, however tenuous, persists that Orkney remains nothing more than a pawned item, patiently awaiting its rightful redemption. This unique and complex history forged a split identity that continues to resonate profoundly today. Ask an Arcadian if they consider themselves Scottish, and you might very well receive a rather complicated answer. They are Scottish, yes, in terms of nationality. But they are, first and foremost, something else entirely. They are the proud children of the pawned jewels. And as we will explore in our conclusion, that enduring Viking ghost is not merely a quaint story told for tourists. It is indelibly written in the blood, the distinct names, and the very independent attitude of the people who still make their lives on the outermost edge of the world. A modern visitor to Orkney might initially assume the Viking Age has faded into distant history. The contemporary landscape, dotted with wind turbines gracefully turning on the hills and harbors bustling with arriving cruise ships, presents a distinctly 21st century facade. Yet, to truly understand the islands, one must listen more attentively, specifically, to the distinctive cadence of the local speech. The Orkney dialect itself is a captivating, almost spectral echo of the past, a musical ghost, that resonates with ancient heritage. It possesses a unique lilt, remarkably distinct from the broader Scots dialects heard in bustling cities like Glasgow or Edinburgh. Instead, it seems to sing, rising and falling with an inherent rhythm that linguistic scholars have directly linked to the cadence of Old Norse. When an islander affectionately refers to a bairn as a child, or uses kai for cows, they are not merely speaking, they are uttering words that would have been instantly recognized and understood by powerful figures like Sigurd the Mighty. The language, it seems, never truly vanished, rather, it artfully went undercover, woven into the fabric of everyday conversation. A final glance at any map of the archipelago further reveals this deep-seated connection. Nearly every island name that concludes with the suffix I, such as Westray, Strandsey, or Ronaldsay, is a direct linguistic descendant of the Old Norse word ey, meaning island. The very geography of Orkney, therefore, continues to articulate its Norwegian origins. Beyond language and place names, the Viking legacy runs deeper still. It flows through the very blood of the islanders. The same groundbreaking DNA studies that illuminated the quiet disappearance of the Pictish people have also unveiled an equally profound truth about Orkney's contemporary inhabitants. A remarkable proportion of men in Orkney today continue to bear the distinct Y chromosome markers prevalent among populations of the Scandinavian west coast. It suggests that the Orkney Vikings, in essence, never truly departed. They simply transitioned from their seafaring raids to cultivating the land once more. For a remarkable half-millennium, this seemingly tiny archipelago defied expectations, consistently punching above its weight on the European stage. Its influence was vast, terrorizing kings, reducing formidable castles to ash, and ultimately shaping the destinies of no fewer than 3 nations. Orkney birthed legendary figures, monstrous warlords like Sigurd the Mighty, whose vengeful power extended even beyond the grave, and revered saints like Magnus, who achieved a unique form of conquest through his martyrdom. The compelling narrative of the Orkney Vikings fundamentally redefines our understanding of power dynamics. Conventional wisdom often posits that true power emanates from established centers, from the grand metropolises like London, Paris, or Rome. Yet, Orkney offers a counter-narrative, demonstrating that power can be forged through profound connection. By bravely mastering the formidable sea, these resilient islanders transformed what was once perceived as the very edge of the world into a vibrant, influential center. They unequivocally proved that geography is not an unyielding destiny but rather a boundless canvas for opportunity. In the contemporary political landscape, Orkney is officially recognized as an integral part of Scotland. The historic pawn ticket of 1468, which theoretically allowed for its reclamation, was, of course, never redeemed by the Danish king. However, on a deeper, spiritual level, a profound redemption unfolded long ago. The resilient people of Orkney have resolutely reclaimed their distinct identity, forging a fierce, independent spirit that transcends the claims of both Scotland and Norway, belonging solely to the islands themselves. These islanders are the proud keepers of the magnificent St. Magnus Cathedral, the dedicated guardians of ancient Neolithic tombs, and the direct descendants of the infamous pirate earls. The formidable Viking longships have long since vanished, either swallowed by shifting dunes or succumbed to the corrosive embrace of the salty sea. Their fearsome axes, once wielded in battle, now lie quietly rusting within museum display cases. Yet venture to the dramatic cliffs of Yesnaby, particularly when a ferocious 60-mile-an-hour winter gale whips across your face, and you will undeniably feel it. The indelible ghost of the North lingers still, a powerful, palpable presence carried on the very breath of the wind. Ultimately, the Orkney Vikings did not vanish into obscurity. They simply evolved, becoming intrinsically woven into the very fabric of who we are today. If this captivating journey into the forgotten empire of the North Sea has resonated with you, please consider taking a moment to like this video, as your support genuinely helps our channel navigate further. And to ensure you don't miss our upcoming historical deep dives, be sure to subscribe and activate the notification bell. Now, I pose a thought-provoking question to you. In your opinion, should Christian of Denmark still possess the theoretical right to repurchase Orkney in the present day, or has the immutable tide of history irrevocably sealed that possibility forever? I invite you to share your insights and reflections in the comments section below, as I genuinely make an effort to read and consider every single one. Until our next exploration, continue your own quest to uncover the rich tapestry of history that lies, often unseen, beneath your very feet.